All right, so let's get to the Sweet 16. Let's start in the East region in New Jersey. This game tips off 7:09 Eastern. BYU, Alabama. The Tide laying 5.5, a total of 175.5. This was 173 earlier in the week. So clearly some people are loving the over. And it makes a lot of sense because we know Alabama can shoot a ton of threes. They play at a high tempo. And we've seen BYU play in these types of games as well, winning over Arizona earlier this year, 96-95. So, Jenks, I think we're going to both be on the Cougs here. So what's the reasoning behind taking the dog here?
I think it's because BYU plays a type of game that matches up well with Alabama. I mean, sometimes Alabama can just outscore you, right? But BYU can hang with the Crimson Tide. And as crazy as it sounds, I kind of like the over a little bit. 175 and a hook is sort of ridiculous. But the Cougars are very much like an NBA team. They have a stud player in Richie Saunders. So what they'll do is they will run with Alabama. Not many teams can do that, but the Cougars can. They'll shoot a lot of three-point shots. And so they're very efficient at doing that compared to other teams remaining in the tournament and other teams across the country. So if they continue to play like we've seen throughout the tournament and throughout Big 12 play as well, remember, they've won 11 of their last 12. They've been playing good basketball for a long time now. I think this number just is a touch too large. And also, BYU during this stretch has beaten some of the better teams in the country. Arizona still remaining in the tournament. They've beaten Iowa State. They've beaten Wisconsin. So they've proven they can play against some of that top-tier competition. I'm going to be on the Cougs.
Yeah, I'm going to be on the Cougs as well. They have a winning record outright as underdogs this year. As underdogs, 5-3 straight up. So even if they don't win this game, I do think they can keep it relatively within striking distance. Also, talking about that total, it's now 176.5 over at BetMGM. So people are loving the over. It's a high one. Maybe I'm not going to play it, but I do think we see a lot of points scored. The thing about Alabama as a favorite here that makes me a little nervous, obviously when they're at their best, Alabama looks like a team that has one of the best offenses in the nation. But here's what I worry about. When you have this long layoff and you change locations, sometimes it can hurt the teams that rely heavily on shooting the three-point shot. Alabama is one of those. You know, it's unfamiliar rims. Some of these games are played in football arenas. So maybe that's not the case here, but still, I think it's a tough matchup for Alabama with BYU. And plus, they've been good against the number. You mentioned it. Their winning streak also going 10-2 against the number in their last 12 games. I just feel like the market is a little bit too low on BYU. All right, next up, let's go to what should be a good game, Maryland and Florida. Florida laying 6.5, total of 156.5. We know the Crab Five have been one of the best stories to follow of the entire tournament. But Jenks, we didn't talk about this earlier. Their head coach is surrounded by rumors that he's going to take the Villanova job. And I don't understand why people are like so mad. I guess because he outright did not say, I'm saying it, Maryland, this is what we're worried about. He kind of deflected. He said, hey, I'm going to talk about the game, which I feel like is perfectly fine. Does this have a place in the handicap for you in this game? Or do you think that, it's just kind of chatter?
No, I think it's kind of chatter. And ultimately, it's going to come down to, like how these guys perform in the court. It'd be different if Kevin Willard were like, all right, let me cut about an hour out of my game planning here and go up to Philly for a little bit, or talk with the Villanova officials who may or may not hire me. Ultimately, whether that works out or not, whether that's a thing or not, you want to continue winning. If you're a competitor, you want to win. And they've come so far. I don't think the head coach is suddenly going to become distracted. This is part of the game too. Do you know what I mean? Like with Will Wade, we heard that story that he was probably going to go to NC State. And I know it's a one-game sample size, but still, the point remains, Will Wade was rumored to go to NC State. We thought, will that affect how McNeese plays tonight? And McNeese pulled the upset. So I don't think it's going to be a factor.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I think it's going to be more about the players on the court and the execution. And for Maryland, this is the case for them as an underdog. I think the long layoff kind of helps them, a team that is not very deep, but they've had some time to reset their legs and, get, back to normal as opposed to early on in the tournament when you're playing all these games back to back to back. But it's also hard for me to sit there and say Florida's not going to win this game because Florida has been the deepest team, in probably college basketball all season long, and they just don't have any holes in their game. So maybe we see more magic from Derek Queen and company, but I'm just not seeing it. I think for me, I'm going to play Florida in a money line parlay. I do think they win. 6.5 scares me a bit. Jenks, are you laying the 6.5?
Yeah, I think I will. And I'm really bullish on Duke and Florida, and I'm doing some research as we speak. But ultimately, I just think this is where Maryland's going to kind of run out of gas. And all season long, the knock on Maryland has been great starting five, no bench. Great starting five, no bench. At some point, you have to have your bench guys step up. At some point, when you get tired and you go on a tournament run, you've got to have guys come off the bench and spell you and be effective. And Maryland really doesn't have that at all. And Florida does have that. And not only that, the numbers are the numbers. I mean, 26-10 against the spread this season, fourth best mark in all of college basketball. I like Maryland a lot. And initially, I lean towards the Terps because this is a pretty big number because Maryland is super talented. But ultimately, I think that Florida depth and their experience in the SEC is going to matter here. And I will lean Florida to cover the 6.5.
Yeah, I think playing the gauntlet of the SEC really does them wonders here because, at this stage in the game, you've got to be able to put out a consistently great product. And it's the consistency for the Gators has been there all season long. And we've seen Maryland in a lot of these tight games, but they've lost all those tight games. Obviously not the last one, but I do think it's going to be Gators on top in this game. All right, next we got Duke and Arizona. Big number here, Duke laying 9.5, total of 153.5. Jenks, can we start there? Because I think we're both going to be on Duke in this game. What about a total? Like, we know Duke then can score in the 90s, and we've seen it in the NCAA tournament, scoring at least 89 points a game. And it feels like this game script is going to be run and gun. Both these teams play at a pretty high tempo. Even if Duke's not going up and down the court, they're very efficient. Like one of the best offenses in college hoops, we know that, and a top-end offensive player in Cooper Flagg. So I think the over is certainly worth a look here. But I also like Duke. So of those two plays, are you just taking Duke? Did you consider the over?
I did not consider the over, but I think you're right. I think the over is a strong play here. I mean, you know how Arizona's going to want to fun and gun it.
Yeah.
The one thing I will say though is that Duke is a sneaky great defensive team. So they can lock you down. I think that's the only sabotage factor. But if I'm going one way, I go to the over. I think Duke is similar to Florida in that these are two teams that A, are complete teams. B, they play great defense. They don't get credit for that necessarily just because they have stars. If you're talking about Cooper Flagg or Walter Clayton Jr., whoever it may be. But I think more than that, it's just that they just keep covering. Like the number can't be high enough for these teams. 9.5 is a lot, but I'm not sold on Arizona. Duke is 24-12 against the number. They've covered in 10 of their last 12 games. And if you can lock Arizona down, you can shut them down because they're not an efficient team anyway. Like Caleb Love will drive me crazy where he'll drop a lot of points and shoot 37% from the field. That's not a good way to make a run deeper into the tournament. So Duke looks like the best team in this tournament. They become the favorite to win this tournament. And so I know it's a big number, but chalk and big numbers have been covered throughout what we've seen so far. I'll lean Duke.
Yeah, I think I'm going to lean towards Duke as well. Caleb Love, of course, is going to be one of the bigger storylines in this game. Of course, somebody who played at North Carolina obviously knows Duke pretty well. But I think there's some variance here that even if you play a total, even if you play a side, because Arizona just shooting the three ball has not been good this year. One of the worst marks of any team still in the tournament, shooting just 33% from long range. So that's the thing. Like if they hit more threes than they usually do, maybe they keep it close. But if I'm betting on it, I still am going to bet on the more dependable team. Duke shooting 38% from the 3-point line and the number one offense in the nation with the more NBA lottery pick. So I'm going to go with Duke laying the 9.5. The market, it hasn't even been high enough on them. Like you mentioned, the only two games they didn't cover during that 12-game stretch were the two games they didn't have Cooper Flagg. So I'm going to go with the Blue Devils. I'm not going to root for them, but I will be betting on them. All right, let's go to the West region. Texas Tech hosting Arkansas. Arkansas has been a scrappy team, the only 10 seed left in the tournament. Texas Tech laying 5.5, total of 148.5. So can the Hogs continue to prove people wrong, or is this where it ends for Arkansas?
Don't I need a dog on a card? I'm laying all this chalk here. I feel like if there's a dog that could cover, I'm on BYU. I take that back. I have BYU plus
Yeah.
5.5. So I didn't necessarily take all favorites here. I think maybe Arkansas could do it. But the one thing that scares me about Arkansas, and I keep saying this, but Arkansas was good against St. John's. It's just that St. John's could not hit anything. They were 2 of 22 from long range. They were missing layups. Brooke Coutinho took R.J. Lewis Jr., his best player, out of the game because he was like 3 of 17 from the field.
Mm-hmm.
So St. John's had to shoot very, very poorly for Arkansas to get that win. Credit to the Razorbacks, but Texas Tech is a team that isn't getting a lot of national attention. They've been very good. The only team to beat Houston at home this year. I think maybe Texas Tech minus 5.5 is the play.